Call to order. Do I have a motion on the minutes of October 20th?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, actually, I'm sorry.
Yeah, roll call.
First, so we have to follow the remote rules. Dawn, could you let us know why you're, whatever, where you are, if there's any.
I am stuck at home and I am in a room by myself, but there are people in the surrounding rooms in the house.
Okay. All right, so our votes will be by roll call. So all in favor, Dawn?
Yes.
Jamie?
Aye.
Thank you. For me as well. Okay. Okay. First agenda item is map update, K through 6 rollout, 7 through 10 pilots and selection process.
Sure. So Donna Danell currently is in training, otherwise she would be here to give the K-6 rollout report. Things are going smoothly as can be expected, given that it's, you know, crazy time of year and we're dealing with a lot of things. Teachers on the final early release day in October had their second training with Envision, which was the Success Maker online piece that they would receive their training on. They are working through some kinks and bugs, and like I mentioned last week or last month, the ramp up to try to get us to where we need to be is taking a little longer, but things are progressing pretty well for K through 6. 7 through 12, they are still picking through some different programs that they're interested in, working with publishers to get samples. We will be meeting after the Thanksgiving break to narrow some things down and set a timeline for the pilot, and the process, again, just to remind everybody, is going to be similar to what we did for K-6. So things are moving, and we're looking forward to some sort of a good outcome.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Dr. Hanks, how is the feedback from the teachers on the use of this new program?
There's a lot to it, and they're getting used to all the different pieces. I know I just spoke to Donna today, and she said specifically 6th grade really likes the pacing and what's involved in it. They're just still trying to figure out all of the different parts and wading their way through a lot of it. They did discover part of the reason that things have been so slow going is the first unit in the books is basically a recap of a lot of the big ideas from the previous year. So because we didn't use this program in the previous year, that's part of the reason the ramp up is taking so long. It's been taking a long time to sort of backfill some of the information with the students. But I think that, you know, as we progress further into later units, it's going to get a little bit smoother.
Do they like the, for lack of a better phrase, the look, the feel, the textile of the program?
Yep, they do, and the kids are getting used to it. You know, it's a whole new procedure for them with books and manipulatives, especially for the littles, the ones in Bakey using counters and number lines and things like that, but they do like it. And the kids seem to be engaged with, you know, it's very colorful, and it's one of the things that Dawn pointed out when we were looking at them. The kids are really engaged with things. Ryan, I don't know if you want to chime in about what you're seeing.
Sure. I talked to team leaders, grades 4, 5, and 6 on Tuesday morning. Very similar to what Patty's already shared. One of the things that came up this week, and timing is, you know, everything, but they said that the online components of Envision have actually been really helpful, just based on some of the hurdles that we're experiencing right now. There's more there than what Everyday Math provided. 6th grade specifically shared that, you know, it goes back to our conversation last month where there are curriculum bands or spans, you know, like 3, 5, 6, 8. The 4, 5 experience is a little different than grade 6. And what grade 6 is finding that there aren't as many teacher examples for them to use. They're having to do a little bit more work on that end. Grades 4 and 5 are not finding that problem, but it's just, again, it's a little bit of a shift for what the 4 or 5 students experiencing versus the grade 6. But again, that's nothing that's not solvable. It's just you know, as we go through it, it's just something that they're finding is a little bit short for them. Otherwise, again, you know, they're working through it, you know, they're trying to build kids' math literacy. You know, there's a lot more reading in this program as far as like math word problems, so.
Yep.
That's something that, you know, is again, a ramp up. 'Cause it's something they didn't have the same level of experience with. I think that's a good thing in the long run, so. Yeah, my pleasure.
Okay, anything else?
When Dr. Kenneth gets here, something has to happen.
No, he-
I'd like to hear from him, right? About that baby. We can wait and keep going. He might have got lost or something. He is new and he doesn't know.
Might be at the other end, that's where I would start mine.
No, we told him it was this room.
Yeah, we told
He had just texted him a little bit ago.
Okay, well, it's okay. Stuff happens.
them. Okay, well, let's move on for the moment to the high school graduation committee update.
Okay, yeah, I can speak to that. So the high school graduation committee reconvened this past week. We did a lot of work last winter and spring that led to the board voting to shift us from a 28 credit diploma to a 24 credit diploma. You know, other decisions as well, such as, you know, in the future shifting from 1 credit full year electives to half credit electives. Our focus really for this coming winter is much narrower. We did a lot of work last winter. I just shared a document with most of you about, you know, one option for how we could phase in the 24 credit diploma. So you should check your email for that, just so you know what I'm referencing. But really, at this point, we have 2 major things to accomplish as a committee. And that, again, it's recommendations for how to phase in the 24 credit diploma and coming up with revisions to our diploma with distinction. Okay, so Heidi Levitt's going to speak to the diploma with distinction in a minute. And what we talked about on Monday and where we think we're going to go with that. But with respect to phasing in the 24 credit diploma, again, currently our graduates need to earn a minimum of 28 credits. So we had a discussion about this on Monday, and a teacher had already put some thought into it. And after the teacher on the committee presented it, we thought that actually sounds like a pretty fantastic idea. So we discussed it for a bit. And if you open up the email that I sent you, you can see it. Obviously, this year's senior class, the class of 2022, still needs to earn 28 credits because nothing's changed for them. But then for next year, and sorry, those of you at home can't see this, but it would be also a 28 credit diploma would be required because for the first 3 years in school, they could have earned 8 credits as the chart shows, which would be 24.
Hold on, Brian behind you, Troy can't get in. Oh, that's not.
Yes, if you're here for the meeting.
You know what, I'm gonna love this, 'cause I didn't realize it was lost.
Okay. So, the class of 2023, our junior class, they would be expected to earn 28 credits. Again, how many credits are earned per year can vary, but the document that was shared with us that we discussed would, you know, in theory, there are 8 each of the first 3 years, freshman, sophomore, junior, and then, you know, minimum of 4 next year. If you think about it, let's say they had a 24 credit diploma, they'd be done. If they earn 8 credits,
Right.
freshman, sophomore, junior, they're done. Hey, senior year's over.
Well, that came up in the
Yeah.
committee, the unintended consequence of people are already coming in, I think I said to you, saying, hey, we're gonna be at 24, I'm not taking anything but my English next year, I'm done. And clearly that wasn't the intent.
Yeah, I know a principal whose son would take advantage of that situation.
You would.
So obviously it wouldn't be fair to make them earn, 6 out of 6 next year, because that's never been the case. They've always, been able to essentially earn 7 out of 8. So, in this case, and you wouldn't want them to have a higher minimum, because if you require them to earn 5 credits next year, they've earned 29 credit diploma. So actually, so that didn't make, so in terms of the class of 2023, the 28 credit diploma seems to make the most sense. 2024 will be a 26 credit diploma, the thought being 8 freshman year, 8 sophomore, and then 5 and 5. And then for the class of 2025, be a 24 credit diploma. This year we've been 8, and 6, 5 and 5. And again, those numbers really they're not fixed. It's, you could earn, 8, 6, 6, 4. It doesn't, it's just the numbers that this committee member chose to put down, but it seemed to make a lot of sense. Again, those of you at home didn't follow it. Really, it's, this year's class has a 28 credit diploma, next year's has 28, and it's 26, 24 credits. I don't know if I did a good job explaining that. It's a little bit hard to do without a visual, but
No, it makes sense.
It makes sense.
It's a gradual phase, and it's what we expected would occur once we got to this level before.
What helped me when it explained was, right now, you have the 28, diploma. You take 8 courses a year, that equals 32, so potentially you're going 7 of the 8. So then it was, okay, if you're gonna go to 24, that's gonna be 6, so that's when Mr. Malone was talking about the 5, you still have that ability that you don't have to ace everything in order to graduate. There's room for courses that just you're not good without taking you out, as we have today. Because the intention was never to try and penalize anybody through this process. It was more time and seat on the core items of the academic program.
So there's a couple things with that. So I've actually, in the budget proposal for this coming year, I've added a dollar amount to give us some funds to offset for credit recovery, to pay teachers if we're going to do some after-school programming or some summer programming. If we have students who need it, if they run out of slots, so to speak, in their schedule and they have credit recovery that they have to do, doesn't mean that they can't be doing it through VLAX or other asynchronous means, but some kids may need some tutoring tied to that. So there's a small amount of money in the budget proposal for that. I don't remember.
It's answered in one of the questions this evening.
Yeah. So I thought I would point that out since you brought that up there. It's a good segue.
No, it's a good point.
Yep. And there's 2 other handouts that I passed out that kind of go with some of the graduation committee work. And it's more just an FYI for all of you, because they pertain to last month's discussion. The first, we had talked about a couple different Bell schedules that would apply for next year, but we were talking in generic terms about a skinny day type schedule where you have all the classes every day for the same length of time. And then what we're calling a 3-2 option, where you have skinny days where you see all the classes 3 days a week. And then you have the option for some block classes 2 days a week. So neither are final right now, but in a lot of my conversations with students and with staff at the high school, it seems as though there's a 2-to-1 favoring of option 1 over option 2.
All skinny.
Correct.
Yep.
So now we have to make sure that we're aligned with the middle school. We're gonna have similar schedules next year, just to allow us more flexibility to share staff. So Matt has not had conversations with his building as to whether they would prefer one over the other, and that really needs to be taken into consideration. Doesn't mean that we have to be completely lockstep in our schedule, but we have to be tied enough so that we can plug and play UA teachers period by period, so that we just get the most benefit from the staff that we have, whether it's art teachers, music teachers, that sort of thing. What we have right now is somewhat flexible, but it's also somewhat limited. So that was one thing. The other thing, again, more of an FYI, but I alluded last month to a list of potential elective courses that might find their way into the program of studies this year. So what I did for you is actually just a data dump of all the different courses. There's a lot of them there. And again, just in full transparency, I just want you to see how things are working out. This is a very rough draft. Not all of these are going to make the final cut. Some will get combined. There's lots of spelling errors and unfinished sentences, et cetera, in this as well. Our staff, we did a whole student survey. We got feedback from students in grades 8, 9, 10, and 11 on what their interests were. Staff's taking that data. They're going to be shoring up their recommendations for what they want to see for courses, and we're going to be using our December 1st early release day to work on that. So our hope is that for the most part, Heidi and I will have a more complete working list on December 1st, because then there's a whole other layer that has to be completed where we go in and we check courses for NCAA, Running Start with dual enrollment, New Hampshire Scholars, and some other things that we have to check before we can get everything finalized and buttoned up and ultimately ready for kids on January 1st. So it's heading in the right direction. There's a lot of great courses there. A lot of these will be half credit options for kids, and there'll be opportunities for kids to take things more than once perhaps, because they can do a beginner level and advanced level like we do now. And kids in general seem really excited about some of the different possibilities. There were some surprises in there. We even resurrected a few favorites. So the Japanese, Introduction to Japanese cultural class that Aaron Cass probably taught, oh my gosh, Tammy, it would have been a while ago, right? I mean, it was probably a decade ago, but it was pretty popular for a while, and then it kind of waned a bit because it's a full credit and it's hard to, justify running a full credit course if you don't have the interest. But as a half credit, I mean, I think we have enough to run 3 sections of it, quite honestly, from the survey. Doesn't mean that many kids will sign up when we do the actual thing. So that's just letting you know sort of the back end stuff that's happening behind the scenes with Matt's committee.
I have a question about process, or one thing, can you email Dawn the 2 documents, because she doesn't have them, she's not here.
I can.
And then second, I was wondering about it was that you said it was 2 to, so what I'm afraid of, and I'm not saying it's gonna be a problem, but I just wonder, what if the middle school staff really prefers the 3 skinnies, 2 chubbies, and the high school wants the 5 skinnies? Like, what? I think we're gonna have to have some kind of a conversation, and we'll meet. But I just want to make sure the middle school staff hears me saying in this room that we all have an equal voice in this. So if the high school's 2 to 1, do they hate it? Or is it 2 to 1, like, yeah, I'd really prefer this, but I can live with that? What's the tone of the 2 to 1?
Yeah, right. And that's the thing. There aren't that many people that are absolutely sold on one or the other.
Okay,
There's
so you're
value in,
like, if we don't do this, it's gonna be a nightmare.
no, and we even talked about the possibility that depending on how things go, we may start off with the 5-day-a-week one and then decide come October or November, we want to institute the 3-2, because now we're at a point where teachers are diving deeper into things and they want a more extended block for kids. 50 minutes isn't enough, because you can introduce and talk about something, but you can't experiment and investigate.
Well, I'm worried about science labs.
Absolutely.
I'm worried about rich discussion in social studies,
Correct.
especially when we get into the
And-
deeper parts.
And I worry, this is my personal opinion, the one thing I worry about with the skinny schedule is it's much easier to follow, but it doesn't promote some of those deeper learning
The
opportunities.
depth of knowledge, yeah.
Correct, to really go deeper with
Okay,
that. So
all right.
we may end up somewhere in the middle, 100%, right? Yeah.
Could you send me this electronically also?
Which one?
The one you're gonna send
Yes,
me,
I can.
just so I have it electronically.
Absolutely.
So just going off of
Oh, Don has a question.
Dawn,
I was just wondering, have we talked to other schools that have these different types of schedules to see the benefits or where they see weaknesses?
Yes, so there aren't that many schools that have a 6-period schedule. It's more common for 7 and 8s.
Okay.
So we've definitely talked with schools about the advantages of having all the classes meeting every day versus not having them meet every day. But again, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I don't think that you solidly get people in one camp or another on something like that. In general, I will say teachers, the sweet spot for the amount of time that teachers want to have kids seems to be somewhere between 60 and 70 minutes. That's ideal, but unfortunately, you know, unless we go to a schedule where we're cutting something out, it's hard to get to that point and have these other things that we need to have running. You know, FLT is really another class, but it's really an opportunity for kids to get a double dose of something that they need for intervention or reteaching. Enrichment, as you know, we're gonna be running band and chorus that way. So we're trying to be mindful that we really don't want that time frame to be so short that we can't do that, because then it defeats the purpose. And now we're back to looking at band and chorus having to be one of your 6 choices. And we know that that could create concerns for kids who, you know, have to decide what they're going to do. So that was the advantage. If we had the 3-2, we have some more of that flexibility to plug and play a little bit. But the downside that staff identified is, you know, it gets a little more confusing to know which day you're at and what happens when you lose a day. So the other thing is, we know that if we have like 4-day weeks, we could just run skinnies all week so that we don't lose one of the block days. Or we could make sure that if we're going to lose a day, we're losing a skinny day and not a block day, so that we don't have a whole group of classes that miss. It's just, the key is Matt and I have to be on the same page for that bell schedule. It's got to be aligned no matter what we do.
Right.
I will say that I've worked in a school that's had the 3+2 model. And it really is, it's really helpful. I have some ideas that I want to talk to Brian about privately before I just don't know, I wasn't in the meeting, so I don't want to, you know, I just want to talk with him. But the primary thing that I would say is that the 3+2 schedule, you do have the flexibility that Brian just talked about is exactly what we did. So if you had a 4-day week or a snow day, you would just change the next day to make sure that you got what you needed that week. And it was predetermined, right? So for example, if you have Monday, Tuesday are skinny days, and Wednesday, Thursday are the bigger blocks, and then Friday's a skinny day to cap the week off before the weekend. If you have a snow day on a Wednesday, then you have the 2 bigger days, Thursday and Friday, to make sure that you get the blocks, right? So that you don't miss those labs and important activities. It's just a matter of deciding and then working on it. A couple of things that I wanted to mention is that I really liked in option 1 that advisory and FLT was at a consistent time. And I think that could be incorporated into the 3+2 schedule on the next page. I didn't like it as much that the advisory is only meeting from 12:06 to 12:22, a 15-minute period is incredibly short for a high school student to do anything meaningful. So I just wanted to kind of throw out there, could we look at combining the advisory and FLT time in the 3+2 system, the way it was in the single system. We don't need to discuss that now, but I just noted that, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
noted the shortness of the advisory and FLT, I'm sorry, the advisory in the 1 day it's 35 minutes, but on the 3-day part, it's 15 minutes. That would really help if it could be combined with FLT to talk about the band program and supporting the length of time that's needed for a full rehearsal. I know as a music teacher, getting kids to band and getting them settled and getting their instruments out, you're only going to get 30 minutes of playing time.
So the problem with that is you could use the skinny schedule that's in option 1 for option 2, but you can't move advisory up to where FLT is in option 2, because then the SST piece won't work.
Yeah, let's
So
talk.
that,
We'll
yeah,
talk.
we can, yeah, and the teachers talked about this too. Honestly, the downside of where it is lunches. And you're gonna have a whole bunch of kids that are gonna miss part of it because of they're coming back or leaving. That's why it was separated, but yeah.
Anything else on on this item?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about, kind of going into that deeper learning and more time to expand on, topics. So one of the other areas that this committee is exploring is what does that diploma with distinction look like? Because right now, the diploma with distinction is really, if you've earned 32 credits, you earn the diploma with distinction with the addition of New Hampshire scholars. So we want to make that a little bit more rigorous and more robust, and something that's definitely more recognizable or a little bit more difficult to achieve. So what we have done is identified a number of different schools that have diploma with distinctions, and the community has divided those out amongst ourselves, and we're going to do some exploring and questioning of what those diplomas with distinctions look like. So asking what makes it a diploma with distinction. And then also thinking about a capstone project, because maybe that's what makes it a diploma with distinction for Sanborn. And so some of the schools that we are going to be looking into also have capstone projects. So we need to learn a little bit more about that. So when do they do it, and how do they qualify? Does anybody get to do a capstone project? Is it an application process? Who grades it? Who evaluates it? Who manages that process? So really kind of looking again at making that diploma with distinction something that really has some pretty significant meaning to it.
Heidi, have you thought about having an integrated model where the capstone project is tied to the academic courses that would logically lend themselves to whatever the capstone project is for the students? So, for example, if it's in the humanities, maybe the English and social studies teachers would have a role with those seniors, and if it was a engineering project, science teachers, connecting them with their organic kind of, for me, it would have been music. I would have done a music capstone, and I would have worked with
Yeah.
the music teacher
And something we've thought about in years past and just kind of tossed around is, does the advisor become somebody who's tied in
Oh,
with
there we
that
go. Yep.
capstone project is? If you're thinking in the world of music, does the music teacher become your advisor
Right.
and then connect you
Exactly.
with his network in the community, who then could come in and be the voice of the people in
Great
the
idea.
industry to evaluate that capstone project?
Yep.
So I think we're kind of looking at all of those lines. It's just looking and seeing what's working for other schools. Because there are some schools that have some great capstone projects that they work on with
I
their
just-
seniors, and.
I just want to make sure I get to be the person that hears all the music.
You're on.
Tell me
Sign
what you
you
want
up.
to do.
Well, I
And then
think
I'm in.
the other advantage is because we've already done so much work with the career pathways piece, we have a pretty large network
Right.
of people to pull from outside of the school
Totally.
district,
Yeah.
all ready to go.
Oh, I think this is wonderful, a wonderful way to integrate the relationships that you've built through your ELOs and all the different things that we're doing and tying them together with more academic rigor.
Mhm.
I really want this capstone project to be rich.
Yeah.
I want it to really be like a miniature dissertation.
And that's exactly what we talked about, is like an orals exam, like a thesis that you have to then present, and, do you need a mask?
My mask just broke.
No, no.
I got someone in next one.
Sure.
Okay.
I'll just
Got one?
this one.
Troy's got one.
You got one.
Sure.
Elementary school.
No, Troy touched it. I can't wear that.
Brian too.
No, no.
For Ryan this week.
So that's kind of where we're at right
Thank
now,
you,
just
Ivy.
in the beginning stages of looking at that.
That's the part I'm really excited about.
Yeah, I think it'll be really exciting.
really cool.
And, but I think also making it so that it's above and beyond the ELO program as well. So there will be components of it that will be very similar to an ELO, but just because you do an ELO or just because you do an internship doesn't mean you necessarily have to do a capstone project. The capstone project is truly going really in depth, really connecting with some community partners, having other people come in and evaluating your work. So professionals in the community looking at is that a welding project? And what does that welding project look like? And did you do a good job on that? And show me the different aspects of it. So, and across all disciplines as well. So it wouldn't just be the humanities or some of what people would say are more academically rigorous classes. It might be some of the trades as well. So I think
Well,
we've
that's
got a
great.
potential for some really exciting stuff. Get kids excited about learning above and beyond their regular classes.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Before we move on, can we hear from Troy about the map?
Oh, just double back, they were at last agenda item asking about how the math program's going.
Oh, so teachers have been working with Donna now every other Wednesday. And Brandy Bolduc, to really get down the pieces for fidelity. So there are steps within the math program that you have to follow. You engage the learners, in their mind real quick about mathematics for the first 5 minutes. Then you move into what would be like a mini lesson. And then you move into sort of small group work using manipulatives, there's worksheets, there's all these pieces, and you do them all together. One of the interesting parts about this is there's less language than you'd say in everyday math, but you can't, those really hard questions that you usually sometimes don't always get to in a math book in the old stuff. Those are embedded. You have to get to that higher order thinking. You cannot skip it. So trying to get it in a time frame has been the biggest challenge for them, because a lot of the kids are still lacking the independence. They're not able to take those higher order thinking skills and just jump right into them. So a lot of the teachers have been working on their goals for this year about trying to get the math lessons in, so they're getting more than completed in a week, but the kids are actually being able to complete them. So it's not just dragging the kid through the actual lesson, it's making sure that the students are going through it, you're assessing where they are, and you're coming back and helping them on the back end. So it's been going pretty well. It's a learning curve for not just the teachers, but the students. And a lot of them that were good at some of the old pieces of the old math program are struggling because this is different. Making sure that you can show what you know, not just can you memorize a quick algorithm, but can you actually take that information and apply it? And I think the application level of this math program is much higher, which is good. Students need to know how to apply what they're using. And it's definitely been a focus of many conversations, even at their own planning sessions outside of the Wednesday meetings. So I've been called down, do you have any ideas about this? I've seen about 6 different lessons now through observations. And they're sticking to them. They're really trying to follow it and incorporate the idea of the workshop model. So still trying to do all the things that we're asking to do, and so fitting them together. And that's been the upcoming next focus, is really about how to make sure that, when you're with a kindergartner, an hour on math without a shift can be a little bit rough. So how do you build a shift in but not lose them? How do you, the nuances of the developmental ages is really what they're kind of focusing on now. Any specific question beyond that?
I was really just looking to get some feel for what the teachers are seeing and what they're thinking about this new program. It's a change. I think it's a very good change from where we were. But ultimately, it's the teachers that are on the front line.
The language and the independence that it requires has been the biggest, I think, struggle for them right now. Because when you say independent practice, a lot of the students, they're out of practice. So when it says independent practice, they're like, and it's not independent yet. So so that part where you would be independent practice and grabbing just the kids that were struggling, you're still working with the whole group. And some of the language, some of the students have not had to use rich math language. So a lot of the teachers are actually having to teach during part of their word work in the ELA is literally teaching a math language ahead of time. A couple are starting to work on some accommodation pieces for them, like using PenFriend, which is a pen that you program and it has a colored dot. So when the kids go to a station or go to do some independent work, and if they struggle, they take this pen, they touch it to the colored dot, and it reads the directions for them if they struggle. to making them more independent. That's one grade's working on that. Other grades are teaching the word problems as part of like the morning meeting kind of check-in stuff. They're starting to try to teach not how to do the math, how to attack and read the word problems. How do you draw the math out? So then when it comes time for math the next week, they've kind of started to see some of this language so they can be more independent. Those are probably the two biggest, I think, I don't know, struggles with hurdles that they're dealing with right now in implementing it. Currently.
Sounds like you're seeing a typical implementation dip too, where you've got some kids in third grade are taking on a more rigorous program and they haven't had kindergarten, first and second. So there's some catch up that has to happen for the teacher. And the kids may not go as far in the curriculum in third grade as they will when the current kindergartners get to third grade and they've gone through the whole program.
Oh, definitely.
The other problem is kids are not in routine. So the pandemic created a whole other problem, which is just kids aren't ready for school every day the way they were a couple of years ago, and they're getting there. But it's Troy spends a lot of time every day just dealing with managing and supporting behavior, as do all of our other principals.
They fatigue.
They fatigue, yeah.
And I don't mean like falling asleep fatigue, but just that concentration, the level of focus and concentration that we're used to seeing at this point is not where it normally is. And they're just like, it's been 20 minutes. Like, I get another 25. So that's where I have to
4
kind of,
hours to go.
yeah, and then we're gonna jump to like another thing, and then it's just getting them back on the saddle and just getting them back, building up that tolerance, the academic tolerance. But we knew that was coming. And Heidi spoke about it, we take them where they are, and we gotta move them forward. It's just, yeah, I see it more, you're not gonna see this, you're not gonna see that nice, you're gonna see more of a J. It's gonna be slow as we build up their tolerance, and all of a sudden you're gonna see this. That's the reality of what we're going to see. It's not a gradual increase, it's going to be slow, and then it will start to ramp up as everyone gets into the rhythm more and the tolerance builds.
Intervention update and overview. Okay.
Thank you. I have enough copies. And I also sent this via PDF to you as well, Dawn. I don't know if you received that. I sent it at 4. Okay, thank you. Perfect. Okay, so moving into intervention. Intervention, as you know, is a chance for us as a school district to provide targeted time to work on specific skills for students as soon as they're showing us a need, as soon as they're crying out for help in regards to our data. So there are going to be 6 components to an RTI model: universal screening, progress monitoring, tiered service, database decision-making, fidelity of implementation, and then professional development. And I'll go over a few of these with you now. So universal screening at Sanborn, we use the NEWA for this purpose. And NEWA for us measures math and literacy. And by literacy, I mean reading, language, and writing skills. Progress monitoring, if you look over at the triangle, I will get into that a little bit under progress monitoring because the kids are going to move through those tiers. But we're looking at progress monitoring in the realm of if a child's in an intervention, how do we know things are working? So these students would then be moved into the small groups to see, let's put them on a map skills for NEWA. Is what we've just done for the past 6 weeks working? Or what else do these students need? Database decisions. This is done at our PLC levels in our schools. They're going to use various data points in order to create a plan for the child that targets those very specific skills that come out of those assessments. Does the child need help, let's say, in operations, or they're struggling with their numbers, or are they struggling in regards to foundational skills in reading, so some phonics skills, fluency skills, those types of things. What our goal is as a district is to really show that each student has made adequate yearly progress. And what that means is that students show 1 year of growth in both the areas of math and of literacy. So regardless of where that child is, that they're going to make 1 full year's worth of growth by the time they leave that grade level. So if you look at the chart here, this nice little triangle, we start with tier 1. Tier 1 is really what is referred to as universal or universal instruction. That's for everybody. And this is a plan that it's to execute interventions and adjust as needed. This is the classroom teacher. This is a chance for the classroom teacher to utilize what Troy was just speaking of. When we're talking about the workshop model, it's moving kids through small groups. It's a chance for kids to relearn at the younger levels, and then ultimately for credit recovery by the time they get to the high school level. So this is where all really the magic happens. It's where all of that instruction takes place. And let's say a student didn't do well on the assessment. A teacher would pull in that student and work with that student within a tier 1 model. And those small groups within tier 1 are super important because they're based on skills that we get from the data and our information. And we're not just using one data point to make all these decisions, we're using multiple data points. Even in regards to, it can be small assessments. Do these students understand how to add and subtract? Because if they can't add, they can't multiply. So those types of things are really delving deep into what's needed in the classroom. But let's say a student, even with that support in the classroom from the classroom teacher, isn't doing well. Then the student would move into a tier 2. Even though they've had differentiation, they've maybe had some learning targets, they've had a goal, and they're not meeting it. And the data is showing that this child's really struggling. And this goes way beyond grades, just looking at a grade book. This goes deeper into what we're seeing produced, what we're seeing at home. I mean, this is everything from absenteeism, how many times a child goes down to the nurse. It can be how many times a student accesses a school counselor. So there's various needs here, so I made sure to include the behavioral interventions as well as social emotional as well. So let's say the child's struggling. The team would meet and they would say, okay, what type of targeted intervention do we need? So then we would move into what is known as a tier 2. This is for a need for support. This is done in a small group setting. And this can be with general education students, but this also refers to sometimes special ed students as well, especially when they're like a learning center with their special education teacher. They're getting targeted support because it's in their IEPs. It's part of their IEP goals to have those supports met. From there, let's say that happens for 6 weeks. You would set a goal with the student. You would make sure, okay, well, how are we going to measure that this goal has been met? These are the skills that the child needs to work on. This is our goal. And then 6 weeks of progress monitor, we'll progress monitor the child after 6 weeks. What if 6 weeks goes by and it doesn't work? The team reconvenes. They meet about the child again. They try some other strategies, put other things in place, create a new plan, set new goals. This time, it might be a little bit shorter. What if that child doesn't do this again? Then all of a sudden, we move into what is known as intensive. This is tier 3. This is our most intensive support. And this is where the kids have considerable gaps in their learning. This also can be for social emotional achievement as well. This is where children with a behavior plan might meet with a behavioral interventionist. They might have very set behavior goals to meet in a classroom. So this is just not something academic, but really looking at where are these child gaps, so much so that they cannot function in a normal classroom sometimes. That their gaps are so large, they need very intensive support. This is where something like Title I would come into play. It's a very small groups of students, and those progress monitorings happen more frequently. So let's say you have the same student and now you've done this. You've done this for 12 weeks, 14 weeks, 16 weeks, and you're still seeing red flags. The parents are on board. The parents will be on board with this the entire time. You're working through this together. You're trying to help this child be successful. And this is where then you would have a conversation, is what we're doing working? And if it's not, then is it time for a referral
For special education.
for special education? Yes. So looking at that, it's how are they showing progress? Are they showing progress in meeting goals? If yes, they would continue with it until they no longer need it. If not, then we would climb up the ladder with intensity or change the goal or even change the strategy we're using. Some students respond really well to a program that would be through Fountas and Pinnell, let's say, but some other students may not. So it's finding the right fit for them, but it's also grouping them according to skill. So it's not an interventionist or a classroom teacher with all these different skills in the same space. It's actually grouping the kids according to what skills they need to work on and then creating the groups from there. That's why the PLC model is crucial with this. It's time talking about what are they seeing, they're laying all the data out and having those meaningful, deep discussions about our students and how we can support them. Setting goals with the students, with the families, and then making sure that those goals are being met. And then from this, we have some current positions that were still open. I know at the last school board meeting, it was decided to convert several of the open para positions to teachers for RTI. I can tell you right now, currently in the building, the high school has one English, ELA, writing, literacy interventionist and one math interventionist. The middle school has one literacy interventionist, but they do have an applied math teacher as well. Memorial has one of each as well. Bakey has one of each, but you also have a math para, is that correct?
We do,
All right.
and the candidates.
And I know that you have several
culinary for
candidates.
math and
Yep,
teachers.
yes.
Nice. Great.
And then, so looking at this, this has been a heavy lift for our staff. So I do want to take a few moments to thank the teachers, the interventionists, the specialists for all their hard work that they've done through the fall to help intervention become a success and work with the students that need the most support in our buildings.
Thank you, Christine. I think that's great. And I think it's really important to think about, look at this triangle this way. Think of it like this way. So if your student is here and they are not doing well, they have to go through all of this before we refer to special education instead of just saying we're having struggles, we need a referral for an IEP. So the goal isn't to stop that from happening. The goal is to make sure that we're trying things before we end up there. And that the goal is not to, the goal is to make sure that the students that receive an IEP are students that truly have a learning disability and not the students that just haven't had the proper exposure and practice. That's the goal of the process.
And it's based on evidence.
It is based on evidence,
lot of
not
evidence.
opinion, right? It's based on factual data, assessments. But it's so important to recognize that there are children, particularly in grades pre-K through 3, that struggle not because they don't have the intellect or the ability, but because they haven't had the exposure. And if a school doesn't have a strong program to intervene and build those skills and practice, they will get referred. When I was a principal, we had 100% of our kindergartners got to grade level my last year. 100% in reading. And the way we did that was we had a program before kindergarten for the kids that didn't have exposure, not the kids that struggled emotionally or intellectually. So we had a pre-K program like ours that had half special ed, half regular ed. And then we had a summer program called Kindergarten Jumpstart. And for 25 days in the summer, you came for 3 hours. It was super fun, super upbeat, energetic staff. You got a letter a day. You practiced one letter every day. So that when you came to kindergarten, you knew your 25 letters and you could read them and say them. You can't imagine what that did for those kids, because what's the next step? Sight words. Once you learn your sight words, you can start to read small books, and then you could, by the end of kindergarten, everyone was reading at a level C. So what that did was it saved, the teachers didn't have to spend those first 10 or 13 weeks of school teaching kids their letters. They could focus on the kids with IEPs that needed help. So when you scaffold for the regular ed kids that just need some support, you actually build the support and more capacity for the teachers of the kids that have more significant needs. It's a very important process. And I haven't brought kindergarten jumpstart up yet because of the pandemic, right? I've just left it alone. It's not time right now but it is going to be time soon to talk about that. It's not an expensive program. It's for a very limited number of students in a very tight capacity. And it works really, really well. And it also gets them used to being in the school and into the routine of school, because typically the behaviors are associated with exposure as well.
Yes.
So I think if we should ever end up with universal pre-K, that will be the seeds of the program for universal pre-K, is that letter sound fluency and basic numeracy in a super fun way. I mean, they used to draw the letters on their faces with paint. They'd go outside and draw them in the sand. They would paint them. We had a music teacher that sang songs with them using each letter. It's amazing when kids it's fun how quickly they can grow. So RTI is all about thinking about a whole school approach, not just, it's about the teachers taking kids in small groups. It's about the interventionists taking them. It's about everybody working together with the goal of knowing the kid and how to move them. And it's not just academic. It's academic and social and emotional, because if the kids don't feel centered and relaxed, their brains aren't open to learning. So we've got to figure out how to get them to work well together to be successful.
No, I was just gonna add to that. What's nice about this model that Christine's put together is it works just as well at the high school level as it does the elementary school level. So you're looking at Algebra 1 books right now. The reason you're looking at these books is that earlier this year, our students took the NWEA math assessment. Our math PLC sat down, they looked at the data. They were specifically looking at 10th and 11th and 12th graders who had gaps in their Algebra 1 understanding, but they weren't in Algebra 1 anymore. They had already moved past that course. They identified all of those students. They picked out a 6 to 8 week unit of study that these students are going to work on, and those students were scheduled for intervention tier 2 targeted intervention with our interventionists during their FLT period. And it's interesting because there were 21 of them sitting here today, and there were a few that were not thrilled about having to come do extra math and didn't understand why they'd have to do that when they felt like they were doing just fine, as they put it in their math class. Maybe to explain to them, you may think you're doing just fine, but the data shows you have gaps in your understanding. It's going to get harder for you to be doing just fine later the further you go into math. So that's why you're here. When you can demonstrate that you're competent at these skills that they're working on, you won't have to come to intervention anymore.
I'd like to invite some of the intervention teachers to come to an EISA meeting.
I think that would be great. Nice. It might be neat to look at like math one meeting and maybe ELA a different meeting, just to see some of the similarities and differences.
Jen Lampron, Newton, New Hampshire. So I do have a follow-up question. So it's got these percentages on the side.
Yes.
And I don't want to make assumptions. Is that supposed to be like what you estimate long-term we will have in each one of these intervention brackets? So like 80% of the students will be here under tier 1, 15% under tier 2, and 5 under tier 3. If we assume that all of our IEP kids are like our tier 3 kids, because it indicates that would include the IEP students. How many do we have in IEPs right now?
So that right there with what you're talking about in regards to percentages, that is like the RTI like perfect model. So that is not currently what we have at all.
Okay.
But our IEP percentage is, well, it differs by school.
It differs by school.
Yeah.
It's roughly 20%, but this
It
is
is,
supposed
yeah.
to be mostly pre-IEP.
Right,
Okay.
exactly. This is correct.
We do want those numbers to come down. In the school that I did this in, they came down by 6%.
Okay.
So we went from 21, 22% to 15%.
but I included them in here because the type of targeted instruction that takes place for students that have a learning center or work very closely with their case manager, it would resemble things that would take place in like a tier 3 type course. Okay, thanks.
Yep.
You're welcome, of course.
So Christina asked some questions on
Yes.
what you just went through. One is you made a comment. I think I'm probably interpreting it wrong, but I just want to make sure of that. So you said that we're going to make sure that people have at least 1 year growth per year. But
That's
if
the
somebody's a
goal.
year and a half or 2 years behind, that's not sufficient because they get out in 12th grade and they're at a 10th and a half grade kind of level. So there's some plan then to be able to identify that it can't just stop at a year's growth if somebody's behind by more than a year.
So the issue is that's the goal for the program, like that no child doesn't make growth. Right now, we have kids in this district who are not even making a year's worth of growth. So I wanted us to start someplace. That our goal is to make sure that we move kids, and we do have kids that are substantially below grade level because of a disability, etc. But I even want those kids to move a full year. Like everyone is making progress. Now, some kids that have intensive interventions make 2 years, 2.5 years. Depending on their program, depending on their situations, we have more than that. But our goal right now is to just show that they're going to make a year's worth of growth. And that's honestly extremely difficult for some children.
Oh, understood.
Yeah.
I don't want to lose sight of
No, neither
an
do we.
annual growth of 1 year may not be sufficient and we
Correct,
can't,
we
we
know
can't
that.
blind ourselves.
You're right
to that.
on. Yep.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
let
right,
me,
you know
let me
that.
put it this way. There's a great book about this, and I can try to get you a copy, but the gist of the situation is if you're 1 year behind, you need at least 2 years to catch up, and that's if everything's going super well. So you need to make 1.5 years growth for 2 years. And most people with intensive intervention can make about 1.25 years to 1.5 years if it's really successful. If you get more than a year behind, you're in real trouble.
Well, yeah, that's why to me, if you're more than a year behind and you're struggling and you're under an intervention program,
Yep.
we have to be cognizant of the fact that a year might not be enough. And so when you're structuring your programs, you can't structure them just towards a 1 year growth goal. And it's got to be, okay, to me, that's the floor. It's not the goal.
Yeah, I think Christine's saying that for now, she's starting there, but we
Yeah.
agree with everything you just said. That's really well put. We might need to talk about the language about,
Well, we absolutely can talk about the
Yeah.
language. It was more of what they're talking about in regards to RTI best practice. Like the goal is to make sure that the children that are in these intensive interventions are making at least 1 year,
1 year's growth.
1 year's growth. But for some children, that takes, like Tom was talking about, the 1.5 years or 1.5. So absolutely, we want to set the bar high. We're not saying this to the tier 1 students, but for our interventionists, that the kids are actually making a full year's worth of growth. Because don't forget, a lot of these kids that need literacy intervention also need math intervention. So they're getting a double shot of intervention. They're struggling socially, they're struggling academically, they're struggling behaviorally. So it's kind of the perfect storm recipe. So we wanted to start them somewhere that we know is attainable in our first year of this. But I agree with you completely. As you know, I want to set the bar very high.
Yeah, the other point, you define your pyramid and you define how that is going to work. And so my perception would be, you just defined the future state and our current state is nowhere near that. Do you have a feel for where we are on our growth to get to the future state that we're trying to achieve? So so Brian just mentioned there's some intervention going on already. Are we 5% towards our future state? Are we 30% towards our future state? Do you have a feel for where we fit on that ladder of getting to the future state that you defined?
I think right now we're 1/4 into this, where every building has intervention. Every building is looking at data, setting goals, making data-driven decisions. I am very curious to see what the MEWA looks like in January. That will tell us a lot, Jamie. One of the things that we did this year that's not what we've done in the past with our assessment cycle is to make sure that we have a second assessment from NWEA, and we also are going to do a third assessment for NWEA for those who are not involved in the New Hampshire statewide assessment. Because of the pandemic, because of the crazy nature of all of our assessments, some of them got thrown out. We needed a baseline this year. And we need something to compare to the baseline. And so the January scores compared to baseline are going to tell us, are we making progress? Have we ameliorated any of the issues we had coming in? Are we still fighting with those issues? Where are we? So we have got to have multiple data points this year, which is going to feel like, everybody's getting tested all the time, and we're trying to make the tests functional, appropriate, short, but also give the teachers information, because if we don't keep track of where we're going, it's like steering a ship in the ocean in the middle of the night. You don't know where you're going. And we need to know where we're going with this. And so that's the second data point. And then the third data point would either be NWEA again, or the New Hampshire statewide assessment, which unfortunately we don't find out until the following
So
year.
that's key right there, and I think it's 5:36.
Yep.
And we have another agenda item, and I
We have
want to
two.
support it. Yeah, but I want to talk about this more, because there's a difference between real-time data and waiting for those assessments to come back.
Right.
So I'll say this, I observed Memorial PLC the other day at 4th grade. They did a phenomenal job. They had the data from all of their students from their fall reading assessments sorted by color and coded. Yellow is 1 level below, red is 2 or more levels below. And they talked about every kid and what their needs were and how they were going to group them and work with them individually. It was exemplary. I want to videotape that and share it with everybody, right? Because they really did a fantastic job. But the thing is, it's real-time data. We're not waiting for the state to send it to us. We're not waiting for NWEA. They're using assessments that's where having that curriculum aligned that you and I have been discussing, and then the assessments aligned to the curriculum, and then looking at it right now. See, my whole thing is, it's just like the pandemic. Don't wait for the state to update their data dashboard. What do our nurses see in their actual, how many kids have COVID, right? Well, how many kids are behind in reading in this area? These kids need comprehension help. These kids need fluency help. These kids need word work help. Do it now. Because if you wait 2 or 3 weeks, you just lost a month. And we all know November only has 15 school days, right? So there is a certain amount of focus or intensity for me as a person, that once this is up and running, it needs to be maintained and very carefully monitored. And it needs to become a part of the culture. We can't mandate it to make people do it and be effective at it. We have to get there to truly buy in. Right now, the biggest block that I see that Christine did not talk about, which I don't want to let slip, is that when we don't have enough coverage, the intervention teachers are being pulled to cover classrooms because of the pandemic regularly.
Yeah.
So it's not a lack of knowledge or an unwillingness of our staff or our teachers to do this. It's literally just, we're still fighting with the survival mode piece, but you can see that the processes are starting to get set up. We're doing way better than we were last November. I can't wait for another year. I can't wait until some of these positions get filled. Troy has some applicants. It's hard to fill positions in November. We might not fill them all, but making them teaching positions, we increased our chances.
Right.
Yeah, you guys have done it. The board has been really supportive and it's making a big difference, but it's just important to note that the skill of the people on the team, everyone's ready to go. We're just kind of taking we're doing what we can when we can. And I think that what the Memorial teachers saw in 4th grade was exactly what Dr. Haynes said at the last EISA meeting. Kids have not been in school for a full year for 3 years. And it showed up in that reading data.
And I can tell you it showed up in NUA when we gave the PALS assessment. PALS is our dyslexia screener that's required by For kindergarten. Yeah, for kindergarten, they've never had so many kids need it before, ever.
So Dr. Haynes has said it best, and I agree with her completely. We can't look at it like they're behind. We have to treat them, this is where you are.
Yep.
And we're going to help. It's like a medical model.
Yep.
If you're not up to shape or in shape or up to par, we're not gonna criticize you for it. We're gonna say, this is where you are, and we're going to help you to get to what you
Yep.
wanna do. And the whole nation is going, the world is going to have
The
to
world is
renorm
dealing
what
with
the grade
this,
level
yep.
expectations are for a little while. The current kindergarten kids, I would say, will probably be normal when they come up to third grade. The current first grade, second grade kids are gonna be on a different benchmarking, and I don't even know how to figure that out.
Well,
I don't know what we do with that.
You gotta prevent leapfrog,
Exactly.
the ones coming up, getting in front of the ones that are already here.
Good try.
Thank you.
Great questions. Thanks, everyone.
So Patty, the agenda item 5 sort of dovetails really.
Yeah, so-
Do you want to just?
The Department of Ed actually did share with a bunch of different news outlets that data was available for folks to look at for the New Hampshire statewide assessment, which we call the SAS. And it is available on the Department of Ed website, but it is in a disaggregated format that is really, to put it, colloquially, not ready for prime time. Because we were in contact with the folks up at the state and we said, so when is this data going to be ready for us to look at? Because in doing a preliminary look at the data that we had for Sanborn, in one section of data, if you look at it by school, we're getting numbers that are different than if we look at it by district. Third grade in Bakey is the third grade for the district. It shouldn't be different, but the data is coming in with 2 different numbers. And this is not even calculations, it's literally just in 2 different places. So in inquiring about this with the state, they said, oh yeah, that data's not been authenticated yet. So you really shouldn't be looking at it for any kind of purposes. We'll have it ready for you after Thanksgiving. And it'll be put into the Iep platform. So what's out there is preliminary, sort of looks like a data dump. If you were to download the CSV file, it is 75,000 lines of data. Q columns across, all of stuff across all the state, including state overall averages, but it's not accurate. It hasn't been authenticated. It's not cleaned up. So we're anticipating for the December meeting to be able to at least share with you what it looks like, keeping in mind that we don't have any data from last year. So it's going to be, a big gap.
Which is also why it's important to be doing the data collection that we're doing.
Yep.
Well, that's why I'm
We
saying,
rely on
local.
this.
We can't wait.
We can't
wait
look.
for
This is
everyone else to help
ridiculous.
us. We have to know where kids are.
Exactly.
And we have to figure that out. In my mind, the most urgent thing that we face as a school district right now is rigorously aligning the curriculum and making sure that the assessments are checking that they know what they need to know, and then doing something about it. That's the work. I mean, after we make sure we have enough sub coverage, but.
And the sub coverage really is a very real
It
thing.
is a
Almost
very
every
real-
day,
every
the
day.
4 principals are texting each other, saying who's got extra people, who needs extra people. It's usually the first question.
Yep.
It's rarely the second question,
Nope.
but today, for example, all 4 buildings were at least a couple of positions short. And to, as Tom said, that's how we make up the shortfalls, is we pull people from things like intervention and other areas to cover first, so, because we've got to make sure there's somebody in every classroom.
Thank God we have them.
Right,
We wouldn't make it if we didn't, but it's not, we're intervening for coverage, not academics.
exactly, yeah. Yeah,
I mean, Crown Jewel's principal's been teaching phys ed every week. Pretty awesome. I mean, Mr. McCluskey, he calls himself Crown Jewel.
dodgeball.
All the more reason why we need to be successful in negotiations.
Yeah, exactly.
Do-
Yeah.
Dodgeball, Mr. McCluskey?
Yeah, you're right on.
Yeah. That's not
No dodgeball?
fun.
What?
I know, I have a Debbie Downer, but.
She's also the guidance counselor.
So it's 5:44 and we have one more agenda item, reading report card updates. Is this a?
So we can make this really brief, and we'll have a bigger discussion about grading at the next meeting, but
Patty, if we do that, can we make that first on the next agenda?
that's pretty much the only thing we're discussing next time.
Okay.
So, secondary level sent home report cards, which are snapshots of learning. Matt and Brian, you want to just quickly explain how that went and what you did with those?
Yeah, I mean, our report cards got pushed out last Friday. Was it last Friday?
Yep.
And it went fairly smooth, from a technical sense. There's a lot of cleanup that happens on the front end for us, making sure that teachers have completed all the different steps. Taking that step helps so that when we do push it out, it looks pretty clean on the user end. I was telling Tom the other day, 4 days later, I didn't have that many emails or phone calls, which is a good thing. That means that either one, the information we put out was self-explanatory and helpful to people, or they weren't reading it. One of the two, maybe both.
So the report
took
cards
some-
that went out were the ones that, like we talked about earlier, that I was able to figure out how to get the letter grade on the report
Yep.
card. That was one of the board goals. The letter grade is on there. I managed to get that set up for folks, so that went out. Went out at the middle school in that format. Memorial will have that format, not for the first marking period. Trimester 1 ends December 2. See, yeah, see, I know. And second trimester is when they will have letter grades, and so that's
And
good.
Matt and I had worked on a handout to put out to middle school and high school parents, very similar. 99% of it is similar, slight differences between the schools, just a one pager that kind of says, here's how to read your new report card. This is what to look for. This tells you this, this tells you this, just something visual that they could look at to help them navigate it.
Yeah, when you said, oh, man, if I said what we did, it'd be the same thing you did.
That's right.
All the same timeline, same process. We were, I mean, we were.
We even pushed them out
Yeah,
within 20 minutes of each other too,
the
just.
process is the same.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that's done.
Must have visual.
Oh,
on
she's
it.
got.
She's there, I think she's just.
I think
behind
this
the-
just popped up in front.
Someone's
You
screen-
exit.
I'll
I
exit.
can hear you guys.
Yeah, we're still there, Don. We're just, a screen popped up in front of you.
That's all right. You don't need to.
Ryan's workout playlist, it has.
There you are.
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe he has his hand up.
Oh, go ahead.
So just, so I actually read them, and I had given Dr. Haynes some feedback on them, but for other people's information. We do need to be careful. We basically have, for example, 3 line items underneath the grade for the course. And they have the numerics on them, 2.5, 3, 3.5. When you do a simple average of the numerics and compare that simple average to the chart up above, it doesn't match the grade, which would indicate that there's different weightings for each line item, but it's not explained anywhere.
Okay, yep.
So if they're not going to be a simple averaging with everything in the equal weight, somehow that information should be communicated. Otherwise, you're going to get people that read them that say, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be a B+ per your chart and I'm a B,
Yeah.
why is that?
That's great feedback, because I think that's something that we can make an easy fix to help make that more obvious to people. Because really, those numbers are totally based on the amount of evidence that's collected. And you may collect more evidence for certain competencies than another, because they're just, I don't want to say they're worth more, but
You've spent
But
more time on
you
it.
spent more time, thus
Yeah.
collected more evidence, thus they really are worth more, but you didn't set back and say, we're gonna decide it's gonna be weighted this much. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but
It just happens naturally by the kind of evidence that you collect.
But if you're the independent user of that as a parent, you have no idea.
Sure.
You take the 3 numbers, you add them up, you divide
Yeah.
by 3, you go to your chart and you say, I've got the wrong grade.
Yeah.
Yep, that makes total sense.
It makes total sense, yeah. Although, and then I will say with that too, some of the feedback I did get from parents is they liked how clear it was that they could see the competency scores with the course. They've not been able to see it that clearly before. And because I got a couple emails and calls saying, so wait a minute, my child has to have at least this score in each one to pass the class? Yes, because we don't want them to have it
And
again.
that's the key, because that's what we've talked about the whole time, is that I'm fine with going back to a letter grade that's easy to understand. But what I wasn't fine with was changing the idea that you had to know certain things to pass the course regardless, because it used to be, you do a whole bunch of stuff and you get a C, and you
Right.
passed, but you didn't know the core material.
Yeah.
And that's the change that's most important. The weighting of it, we can talk about, Jamie. I think that's a really good point. And
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a communication piece, but there's also this whole declining average thing that we can't get into tonight that we've got to talk about. And I think we need to just spend one meeting to just talk about this.
Then the other quick point that I made is there's two courses, advisory and work study practices, that don't have any letter grade, they're just P. And if you look at the assessments, Sarah, I'll use one as an example, they don't make any sense to me. So for example, a child is going to be assessed based upon their contribution to the world. So I think those things have to really be lined up with what are we truly assessing. A child is going to be assessed based upon their tolerance. Their tolerance of what? What is it that is truly being assessed? And there's just, I think I'm very pleased to see this is much earlier than I expected to see this coming out, so I'm very pleased to see that.
Yeah.
But I still think it's a work in progress.
It is,
Mhm.
it is, yeah.
Yeah, I worked very hard and my team was very helpful. So yeah, it's nice to have that board goal done. And the second board goal, I did send out early looks at the strategic plan that we were able to put together, and I was able to finish up with that. And we'll be talking a little more about the strategic plan in the next 2 months.
Yes, we will. Great.
I need to use the loo, so can I've got to be ready for the next meeting.
Public comment?
Tammy has to adjourn us.
I think we need to adjourn us. Okay, then, yes, well, next agenda, so our next meeting is on December 15th. I heard a discussion on grading.
We're gonna talk a little bit about the Gusky book. The principals are actually working on a presentation to unpack the books that were read over the summer by the board, so they'll be presenting that. And we can talk a little bit more about grading. So I think that's probably enough for that meeting.
I'll put together my unpacking of Gusky too.
And I
Remember the tip about Gusky. He's kind of like, your Marshall and other folks in economics, prime researchers, so.
And I also heard the data from the Department of Education.
Yes, I should be able to at least give you guys
Hopefully
an
that's
overview
also
of the
by
data. Well, they say after Thanksgiving.
Don't count on it.
That could be November 30th, that could be December
Don't count
28th.
on it. Okay. Oh, wait, yeah, okay. fair enough.
Right.
I just-
Thank you.